Good morning, Grace Center. Sunday morning for you. Strangely enough, it's Wednesday night for me right now as I'm preparing this message for you, getting ready to share what God has on my heart for Momentum series this month. Been excited about this series for some time. And as you know, May is Momentum Month every year here. Usually it centers around a spring conference that we have. But due to the coronavirus and the restrictions on our gatherings, we decided to not have the conference itself this year, but we are going to begin having our services back here in the building on May 10th. So that is Mother's Day. So be sure and mark that in your calendars. We're going to take precautions and sanitize extra good the rest of this month, just after every service, make sure everything is sanitary and clean, sanitized and clean. And we're going to discourage handshakes and hugs for the time being until we make sure that things are definitely heading the right direction. So that might break your heart if you're into the handshakes and hugs, but let's just settle for smiles in person here for the rest of the month of May at least. So we look forward to seeing you here in the building together on May 10th. So let's just be sure and not forget that. And we'll continue to stream our services live. We've been doing that anyway before this happened. So today is also Catherine Devereaux's birthday, so we want to say happy birthday to Catherine. We love her and Olin very much. I got to see Olin this past week, about a week ago. It was his birthday, and the center that he is in, they did a great job of setting up a nice birthday party for him, and an actual parade was allowed, led by a fire truck, to go through and say hi to him and wave at him. Of course, because of the restrictions, we couldn't get close to him, but we all stood on the sidewalk, took pictures of him, told him we loved him, wished him happy birthday. And Olin got emotional, and then I got emotional, and the rest is history. So love the Devereaux very much. So just wanted to remind you about one more thing before I kind of move forward with the message today. On May 17th, that's a couple of weeks, Amanda Connor is going to be in the house with us, in person, not by camera. She's going to be here ministering that morning, so I want to encourage you to be here that day. It's our 7th anniversary as Grace Center, and so we're really excited about it. May is mine and Stacey's anniversary month, but this particular gathering focuses on the Grace Center, on the vision that God put in our hearts when He called us out to Shawnee, and the thing that we've been trying to build behind the scenes. So we want to celebrate that. We want to highlight that. Amanda Connor is going to come and speak into that. Of course, she is Bishop Tony Miller's daughter, and she is the executive pastor at the Gate Church. So we're excited to have her with us, and we may have a few more friends pop in that Sunday morning service as well to be with us. So just a couple of things to mark your calendar with. Thank you again for continuing to support the Grace Center financially. We've been getting some checks in the mail from some of you and online contributions, and in spite of the fact that we've not been able to gather, you've continued to help support Grace Center, and we're very grateful for that. We thank you for your generosity. You can continue to do that until we can get back together again in person. The Grace Center's P.O. Box is P.O. Box 3248, Shawnee 74802, or you can give at gracecenter.tv, and that's a nice, safe, secure way to give as well. So we're starting a series this month called Momentum, and the tagline says, Getting Unstuck Through Prophetic Direction and Impartation. So I want to take advantage of an opportunity this month to highlight the prophetic, how the prophetic works in our lives. So we want to really break down the nitty-gritty of the prophetic because there are a lot of misconceptions out there. Some people get a little spooky, or they think you're getting spooky if you say the word prophet or prophetic, or if you have an atmosphere where prophetic ministry is allowed. Me personally, even though I'm a teacher, I'm passionate about making sure that we have a prophetic stream flowing in the house in Grace Center at all times. So I might not be the one that it flows through because I'm more of a teacher. So that's a solid graced area of my life that I easily flow in. But I always am very careful to make sure that I bring prophetic voices and prophetic wisdom and insight in. And I do know that the Lord uses me prophetically through dreams and visions and things like that, and through my writing as well. But this month we want to highlight that. But what I want to focus on tonight is getting unstuck, the getting unstuck part in this series. And The law of momentum says an object in motion will stay in motion until it meets a resisting force. Well, that's pretty much so. When we break down the word momentum and we begin to define it, there's a lot of different definitions. We could come from different perspectives. If we were to talk about the law of physics, what is momentum defined scientifically and physically? I'm not educated enough to get into the breakdown of that, although I did do a lot of reading on it this week. But this sums it up, the law of momentum, and it says an object in motion will stay in motion until it meets a resisting force. I don't know about you, but I have met resisting forces in my life over the years. I've been in motion, heading a direction that I felt like God was pulling me or God was leading me, and then I met a resisting force. I encountered resistance along the way. So I want to talk about that because I know I'm not alone in that. I know that each and every one of us have encountered that. If you're alive, if you're breathing, then you've encountered that. So I'm certain I don't need to ask you if you've ever been moving a certain direction with your business, moving a certain direction in your ministry, your education, maybe pursuing a degree, or with your family, moving a particular direction, and then you've been met with a resisting force. Of course, the perfect example, the ready example right now is the fact that we came into 2020 with high expectation. By the way, I still have high expectation for this year, and God has supernaturally provided for and protected us through this entire ordeal. But we came into 2020 thinking things were going to happen a certain way. I guarantee you none of us, unless you're really plugged in as a prophet, saw coming what was coming down the highway in 2020. Because by the time March rolled around, COVID-19 was in full swing and it was spreading. And so the government began to get involved and put restrictions on gatherings. And here we are now in May, the first Sunday in May, and we've not been together in 5 weeks. I didn't see that coming, and I doubt you saw it coming as well. But I want to unpack this over the next few weeks, how to move forward, how to recapture or regain momentum. And I think it's a very timely message for the time that we've been facing and dealing with right now. So tonight I want to start with the subject, breaking Murphy's laws. Breaking Murphy's laws. I know that you've heard of Murphy's Law, and I'm not a pessimist by nature. I'm a very optimistic guy, but I do find humor in Murphy's Law. And, I'm a guy that's worked with tools and worked on construction sites over the years. And so there are times where I definitely could ascribe to having witnessed Murphy's Law in action that day, or maybe even just as a human seen it in action in my life a few times. Here are a few examples of Murphy's laws, okay? These are just some of Murphy's laws. There's several of them. There's one main one. We'll save it for last. Murphy says, friends come and go, but enemies seem to accumulate. Yeah, I've had seasons like that in my life. The other lane always moves faster. Regardless of which lane that is, the other lane, other than the one you're driving in, always moves faster. I've seen lanes before moving faster, got over into them, and then all of a sudden it slowed down and the lane I was in prior moved faster. That's Murphy's Law for you. Anything you try to fix will cost more and take longer than you expected. Yeah, and I want to add this in there, especially if it's your plumbing or your automobile. The chance of a slice of toast falling jelly side down is directly proportional to the cost of the carpet that it falls on. Murphy's Law. A shortcut is the longest distance between 2 points. You ever had that happen before? The light at the end of the tunnel is usually an oncoming train. Anything good in life is either illegal, immoral, or fattening. The repairman will never have seen a model quite like yours. I can attest to that because I am a repairman that gets called out sometimes. I've got called out to work on stuff before, and it's not happened very much in almost 30 years as a plumber, a good 30 years as a plumber. In fact, there's been about 5 times that I've seen something I've never seen before and had to scratch my head on it. Anything dropped will roll out of sight and out of reach. Yep, I can attest to that. The most famous one, though, this is the one that we want to deal with breaking tonight. If anything can go wrong, it will go wrong, and at the worst possible moment. So I want to kick off our momentum series by breaking Murphy's laws. And because this weekend is also mine and Stacey's anniversary, and while you're watching this video right now, Stacey and I are kicked back at Black Mesa Park in the Panhandle of Oklahoma. Why the Panhandle, you ask? Because we've never been there. There are a lot of places that we've always wanted to see, and we've never been that direction. And so we wanted to go spend our weekend out there. So that's where we are right now. I want to ask Stacey, though, because it is our anniversary, to join me for the first few minutes here. And we're going to talk just a little bit about some resistance that we encountered early on in our marriage. Right after we got married, both of us had come out of some bad experiences. And Stacey's going to come on up. She's going to join me. And we had both been in relationships. I had been married before, had children. And that relationship had become toxic. I needed to move on with my life. And Stacey met her, and she had had some bad experiences and encounters as well. And so when we met each other, we thought, all right, this is momentum heading the right direction. That's what I felt. You know, I felt like I had found my good thing that Proverbs talks about. And Stacey loved me and wanted to serve alongside of me in ministry. And so we were both excited to move forward with our life. Fresh starts are always exciting. And both of us felt like we were exactly what the other one was believing God for and praying for in a spouse. I felt like that. I know she's told me before that she felt that way as well. And so we felt like momentum was finally in our corner and on our side, and we were headed the right direction. I felt like that, didn't you? Yeah, and so what we want to do is just share a few stories with you tonight, because remember, we're going to keep in sight the law of momentum that says an object in motion will stay in motion until it meets the resisting force. So we were in motion. We were on the path that we wanted to be on in our marriage, in our relationship, and we began to meet some resisting forces along the way. So we're going to share a few of those stories with you. There's a phrase that we jokingly use with one another when things don't go right. Other than citing Murphy's Law, I don't really cite that one as much, but there was a movie called Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I love Harrison Ford, and I love the Indiana Jones movies. And in the Last Crusade, a group of them are looking for the Holy Grail, which is the cup of Christ in the movie. And so supposedly the one who finds it and drinks water from it receives eternal life. But there's a catch. When they finally enter this room and they find the Grail, it's a cup placed among hundreds of other cups. So what you have to do is stand in the room and look and choose. You have a choice to make. And so they're looking at all these cups. Some of them are modest and humble. Some of them are glamorous, encrusted with jewels, and they have, they're all gold and jewels in them, and just these magnificent looking cups. And this guy is looking at it, and he's a bad guy in the movie anyway, and he's taken advantage of Indiana Jones by kidnapping his father. And so you're kind of wanting to see him, moved out. You're wanting to see something happen to him, And so he says he picks up this glorious, beautiful, jewel-encrusted cup and says, this has to be a cup worthy of a king. And so there's an old ancient knight there watching. He just watches, and this guy takes a scoop of water and he drinks it. And then all of a sudden he begins to turn to dust. And the opposite effect of eternal life is the life is pulled out of you. It's removed out of you. So right there, special effects are cheesy in the movie, but he just begins to decay at a rapid, alarming rate of speed and just explodes into a cloud of dust. The knight looks at Indiana Jones and says, he chose poorly. So that's become our mantra. It's something that we joke around with. If I pull up to McDonald's, who has 2 drive-through lanes, I sat there for a brief moment just trying to decide, do I want to go left or do I want to go right? So I'll go left, and then the right lane moves twice as fast. I'll look at Stacey and say, I chose poorly. And so every now and then, though, we choose right. So we like to joke around about it. But we were married in 1998 on February the 6th, which is also my birthday, in front of the Justice of the Peace in Fort Smith, Arkansas. But our wedding wasn't until May 2nd. which is the day that we celebrate, May 2nd. And so, Stacey, would you elaborate and just tell them why we have 2 anniversary dates?
Well, when we met, we both had children coming into the relationship. He had 3 children and I had 1. It was important for our families to blend, both recently coming out of long-term relationships as well. So during the courtship period, it became evident that we felt like we were a good match for each other. And of course, I was 19 at the time, about to turn 20. And so I was excited about my first wedding, big, elaborate, wanted all of the commercial features of it. But it became increasingly obvious that blending a family with 2 adults and 4 children was a big task. So during our courtship or while we were dating, he needed somebody to help him with the kids. So I worked as well. So I would come over in the mornings when he would leave very, very early to drive up to Oklahoma City to work, or Edmond from Chickasha at the time.
It's about a 1-hour drive.
Yeah.
Each way.
So long, long days. So I would come over in the mornings. I would make him breakfast, get his lunch packed, and get him out the door. And then I would stay until it was time for the kids to get up and get ready and get them off to school. And then I would go to work myself. Then, of course, I would get off work before he would at the end of the day. So I would come home and make dinner. I'm definitely not a Betty Crocker, but I mean, I can whip some mean hamburger helper or something.
I've not starved over the years,
right?
So have I?
Neither one of us are definitely deprived. But so I would make dinner, help the kids with their homework, get them bathed, and get them settled in. And then in the evenings, when he would come home, everything would be done, so we could actually just spend some time together talking about our future and things that we wanted and we desired. It was bliss, because then I would leave at the end of the evening. I would go home and I would call him to let him know I was home, even though I lived a mile away. And I think we would talk for probably another 2 or 3 hours on the phone. So he was definitely not getting a lot of sleep, and I wasn't either.
Good thing we were young, huh?
Yeah. Were young. Yeah. So it was, it moved quickly that way. Obviously, we got a lot of conversation in during that time. So when it came time, Mark proposed to me. We started talking. It was pretty quick turnaround. We started talking in October, and on New Year's Eve of 1997, he proposed to me. So in hindsight, I'm sure neither one of us were really ready. We just knew, me personally, I just knew I didn't want to pass this up. I immediately picked up on the fact that he was the marrying type. I definitely always wanted to be married. So sometimes I guess, don't pay attention to some of the red flags maybe that should appear. But it was definitely something that I knew that I wanted. So he wanted us to marry quickly. I wanted us to plan and spend and just create this fantasy.
You wanted a wedding, yeah.
Yeah, so it was...
I needed a wife, you wanted a wedding.
Right. So we started saving and getting ready. We picked the date in May that we wanted to be married. And Murphy's Law came into place.
One thing after another started happening, and we began to realize quickly we weren't going to be able to afford the wedding that we were planning, just because of some of the financial hardships that were beginning to happen. Crazy things like the engine went out in the truck that I was driving, and so we had to have that fixed. And so, but I didn't want to start. I had promised her. She had said to me, we both agreed that the pace that we were on was killing us. I mean, it was just crazy that we weren't getting to bed until midnight. And then I was getting up at 5 and heading out, leaving the house at 5:30, every day. And so it was really taxing. We knew what we wanted, We knew the direction that we were headed, but we just didn't have the patience to wait on the timing of it to unfold. And so we pushed, and she said, I'll marry you now, but you have to give me a wedding as soon as we can afford it. And so I promised, and I kept that promise. Yep. I didn't want to start off the marriage with a broken promise right out of the gate. So we saved up what money we could, and we borrowed the money that we were short. Yep. we went out and borrowed the money, and Stacey got her beautiful wedding on May 2nd. But in that first year of our marriage, and this stuff sounds like it's straight out of a movie, and I'm sure that a lot of you guys have had years like this as well. But in the first year of marriage, our washing machine broke down. I think it was one of the first things that broke down. Not long after that, the refrigerator that I'd had burned up. The compressor burned up in it. So the air conditioner, I lived in a trailer house. It was mine. I owned it. I had bought it. It was an 80 by 14 trailer. I'd spent some extra money doing some work to it, to make it a little bit nicer. Put some bells and whistles on it. It was still a trailer house, but we had fixed it up the best that we could. Well, anyway, the air conditioner compressor burned up. And it was summertime. And I don't know if you realize how hot a trailer house can get in the dead of summer in Oklahoma, but it turns into a little sweat box pretty fast. So we had to buy a new air conditioner, a package unit to install. And so all of this stuff is hundreds and hundreds of dollars, everything that was happening. The timing chain was the first thing to go out in the Dodge truck. Then the engine itself went out, the motor. The day after we picked the truck up from the mechanic, I don't know if you remember this, but we were excited about having a new motor and the Dodge getting a fresh start, in life. And she took the kids to school and called me and said, you're not going to believe this. The fan blade just broke off. The shaft that the fan blade is on just broke off and launched it right into the radiator. And so it chopped a hole in the radiator. So I wasn't happy. So I called the mechanic. We get it towed over there. And I want, what's going on? You guys just put a brand new motor in. Did you not tighten the fan blade on or what? So anyway, that was crazy, and we had to assume some of the responsibility for that. They met us in the middle on the labor, but we had to buy a new radiator, And so then Taylor was young. Taylor was right about 2 when we married. A year and a half when we started dating. I had kids from my first marriage living with us. I was serving as an associate pastor under my parents. Fred and Cindy Wallace were pastor in Kenwood in Chickasha. And so I was really, feeling a little bit of like I needed to resign because I had gone through a divorce. And there was no scandal involved. There was nothing immoral that happened on my part. So I didn't really, it wasn't that I needed to resign for that reason. But I just knew how some of the Pentecostal denominations were at that time. And I was licensed and held credentials. I had to go before the board and answer a bunch of questions about did I do everything possible to save my marriage. That was like a 2.5-hour interview. And so I tried to turn my resignation into the church board there. I was the associate pastor, and they declined. They wouldn't accept my resignation. And they said, no, we're going to walk you through this. We know you're a good young man, and so we're going to help you get through this. But then I was thinking yesterday, do you remember there was the camping trip that the men, right after we got married, all of the men of the church were going on a camping trip, I think somewhere out past Marlow. I can't remember the name, Clear Creek. Yeah. They were going to a lake called Clear Creek to camp and fish for the weekend. The day before we were supposed to go on the trip, I got rear-ended on the highway on the way to work in Edmond. Somebody ran into me in morning rush hour traffic, hit me hard enough that it jarred my neck. I had a mild case of whiplash going, but whiplash hurts, though. And so I got a little more sore and stiff over the next day or two, so when it came time to leave, I wasn't able to go with the guys. I ended up on the couch taking pain pills and anti-inflammatories pretty much that whole weekend. Then all of us, or both of us rather, had all of this emotional baggage as well of previous relationships, poor decisions from our past that kept jumping up to bite us, it seemed like. And I was working long hours. I was working, like I said, in Edmond, an hour away. And at the time, I was also dealing with a bleeding ulcer. I was in a lot of pain. Had a lot of stomach trouble. I was eating a bottle of Tums a week. I'm not a package, but the bottles of Tums. I was going through one a week of those, trying to figure out what was going on. And this might be a little graphic if this kind of stuff bothers you, but when I really figured out what was going on was one morning I woke up sick. You remember? I got up and tried to run from the bedroom down the hallway to the bathroom. I ended up throwing up all the way to the bathroom, but it was blood. I was vomiting blood. And which it was sky blue carpet in the hallway. that carpet never recovered. Ended up having to strip it out and recarpet. But that's when I realized I had an ulcer. Something was going on there. So, which it got healed miraculously. A singing group came through. And it was a group of Native Americans. I think they were called the Unity Singers, if I'm not mistaken. And the lead singer in the group's name was Rufus. And I remember just kind of internally thinking, wow, what kind of service are we going to be in for? We were used to having dynamic preachers come through. And so that morning I was sitting on the front row, and Rufus had already led them in a couple of songs, and he turned around and said, there's somebody here who has a bleeding ulcer, and God wants to heal you this morning. Well, he didn't even finish the sentence, and I stood to my feet. And I walked forward. I said, that's me. That's me. He came down off the stage and went to lay his hands on me, and I felt buzzing. I could hear buzzing in both ears, and all of a sudden I felt like my head went numb. Well, I fell under the Spirit. I've only fallen under the Spirit 2 times because I'm not going to give anybody a free pass. If you're rocking me or trying to push me, I'm not going down. But if it's the power of God, I always will yield to that. I was in a Benny Hinn service one time and got knocked back several feet. I'll never forget that. But then that morning when he prayed for me, I fell under the power of God. When I woke up that morning, I was healed. I've never had any stomach problems, and that was 20 years ago, a good 20 years ago. So, but anyway, that first year was crazy, all of the ups and downs and stuff that was going on. By the time the first year was up, though, the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess, that we thought we saw was we wanted to have a baby together. And Stacey discovered she was pregnant. So that seemed like the light at the end of the tunnel from a very rough year. That whole first year felt like a tunnel. And so we thought we had the light there, at the end of the tunnel. But I had begun to develop this perception where I had noticed that we would be okay, but stuff would happen. Then we would take a step forward, and then it seemed like we would take 2 steps backwards. We would get this taken care of, but then something more expensive would happen. And so it felt like that the whole first year, really the whole first couple of years. But the news that she was pregnant was exciting to both of us, and it felt like it's just exactly what the 2 of us needed to bring a measure of joy into this mixed up mess that we had been trying to survive, But it wasn't to be. After a church service one night, she came to me and said she was having problems. And what had happened was her water had begun to break, and she was only, 4 months along? About 4 months along, maybe 4.5 months along. So it was way too early for anything like that to be happening. So we called her doctor. He said, get to Oklahoma City, to the hospital right now. So we got her up to Oklahoma City, and the doctor came into the room to tell us, you're not going to have this baby. This baby is going to be a miscarriage. And so, we immediately began to process the disappointment of that. In my mind, where I was mentally and emotionally at the time, I felt like, the light at the end of the tunnel really was a freight train. That's what it felt like. I had been run over emotionally, even though I tried to stay strong for my young wife and for everyone around who knew I was a minister. Emotionally, I felt like I got run over by a train that night when the doctor said that. To add insult to injury, she was far enough along where she had to deliver the baby that night. So she actually had to deliver a stillborn baby, and that was tough that night. I would say at that point in our life, that was the most difficult thing we'd ever gone through. All of the other stuff, air conditioners, truck motors, all that stuff was trivial. All of that stuff could be replaced. This did damage emotionally that would take us years to get beyond. And so things began, and we named him Benjamin Michael Wallace. That was his nickname, or his name. The initials, Benjamin Michael Wallace, obviously are BMW. I didn't really plan that out in advance, but that's just the way that they ended up being, because I named him Benjamin after Jacob's story in Genesis, where it says that he had where Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin, and she named him Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. And so when Jacob parks the wagon, if you will, and gets to the back, the midwife hands his new son to him and says, "Here he is. His name is Ben-Oni, but your wife has passed. She's gone." He looks at Ben-Oni, knowing what a wrong name can do to a person, and he says his name will not be Ben-Oni. His name will be Benjamin. Ben-Oni means son of my sorrow. Benjamin means son of my strength, or son of my right hand. So Jacob, who had spent his whole life identifying with what a wrong name can do to somebody, decides as a father, I'm going to change this situation right now. So I latched onto that. It's all that I had at the time. I latched onto that, and I said, we're going to name him Benjamin prophetically, because he's going to be the son of my right hand. God's going to give us strength to get through this. What were you going through that night? Do you want to add anything to that, or during that season?
Been fortunate that through that whole process, we've actually been able to minister to an innumerable amount of women who have miscarried or lost babies or lost children. And so that's definitely been a testimony of it. But honestly, at the time, there was nothing but anger raging inside of me. I had a child before, so I knew that it wasn't my body that was broken, but the loss, on top of the new marriage, the instability of all of that unknown was a lot to process. The actual events of that evening were traumatic. The way that I was cared for, the way that I was treated, the doctor that I had to deal with, the process of the delivery was insane. And 2 days after the delivery, the hospital was calling, saying that we had a $6,000 balance and we needed to advise them how we were going to take care of payment. And I lost it and said, how dare you? I wasn't even able to bring a child home 2 days ago. So it definitely, anger was probably the most dominant trait, which I, again, was young, had a lot of, just misunderstandings in general about how to cope with some of that stuff. So I'm very fortunate that I think at the time we both were dealing with it with a totally different perspective than maybe what we would have dealt with any other kind of tragedy, because any other time of tragedy I would have run and hid, but at this point I needed security, I needed affirmation and love and affection. So I was reaching out to him for those things, and even my young daughter at the time, just for affirmation that it was not something that I did or that my body caused. But I think for him, he, of course, was very compassionate, very understanding, and very nurturing at first. But through the process of all of that, we both, I think, almost turned the tables completely in how that we dealt with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and we did end up having Abigail after that, but she got pregnant so quickly the first time, but then it took almost a couple of years before she was able to get pregnant and have Abby. And so Abigail means father's joy, right? And that's why we picked that name, because I just prophetically declared this baby is breaking the pain and the mourning from the previous season of our life. And so that's why we named her Abigail, Father's Joy. But I was angry with God for allowing the baby to miscarry. It wasn't nobody's fault. It wasn't even his fault. So I wasn't mad at him because of it. I was mad at him through it because of his lack of intervention and because of his silence on the matter. Keep in mind, I'm somebody who's who has been having conversations with the Lord for many years. Now, you process that however you need to. Sometimes people don't understand when you say God said. But God talked to me, and he had since I was 12 years old. And I had always had dreams and visions where he would speak to me. So I was used to being led by his Spirit, hearing his voice, feeling his presence. But then in that season, I felt like he went silent on me, about when I would, but I would later find out I was asking the wrong questions. And because he wasn't giving me answers, but it was because I was asking the wrong questions. And it was years before I discovered when you ask the right questions, the answers come pretty quickly. And so he wasn't giving me the silent treatment. But on one Sunday afternoon, I finally blew up. And the silly thing is I was just watching a football game. She had gone to take a nap. We were having a Sunday night service. That was back when everybody came together twice on a Sunday for church. And I was watching the Cowboys and the Redskins play football, and I was the Redskin fan. The Redskins had their glory days in the 70s and 80s. They won one Super Bowl in 91, but then it had been nothing but Dallas for several years. So by the end of the 90s, I was getting sick of Dallas. I liked Troy Aikman, but I was just getting sick of watching Dallas win. So the Redskins were playing the Cowboys. The Redskins jumped up 42-14. So I just remember, when we're in a bad place emotionally, we began attaching expectation and attaching our emotions to the wrong things to try to find affirmation or joy from. So I sat there watching that game that afternoon. With every touchdown the Redskins scored, I thought, finally, something in my life to feel good about. Something in my life I can cheer for. And so then they'd score again, and I'm like, now this is what I'm talking about. This is what winning feels like, because I felt like I had lost for the last we had lost. I felt like we had just had one loss after another. And I'm not talking about football. I'm talking about in life. So the Redskins built up a 42-14 lead in the third quarter. So the game should have been over with. But Troy Aikman, he hit somebody for a touchdown. I was like, okay, still 3 touchdowns up, Pretty soon he scores another touchdown, and I'm like, come on, man, just get all the Redskins needed to do was make one stop, and the game would have been over. The Cowboys get the ball back. He scores another touchdown. So pretty soon they're only one touchdown behind, and I'm like, Jesus, you got to be kidding me. And then it began to really feel like what my life was like at that time. So I'm sitting there in my recliner watching this unfold, and I'm like, this can't be happening, which is kind of what I had been saying for the last couple of years. And then they scored another touchdown and tied the game. And as time was expiring, they tied the game, sent it to overtime. Dallas got the ball first, won the coin toss. First play, Troy Aikman threw a pass for a touchdown, and they won by 6 points in overtime. I blew up. I jumped up. I threw the remote through the house, threw it so hard it stuck in the wall. Then I was mad about that, and I went and I put my fist through another wall in the trailer. And I was furious, not just over a game, but because I had attached so much emotion and expectation into that. So everything had finally begun to spill out. The game just offered the avenue for that. So Stacey called Dad and said, man, he's going crazy. So Dad got on the phone and said, we'll talk about it when you get to church tonight. I said, I'm not coming to church tonight. I said, as a matter of fact, I'm not coming back, period, until God gives me some answers. I've been asking him questions now for several weeks, and he's not answering me. So I said, I want nothing to do with him right now until he quits being silent on me. So I won't be there. And he was like, he was a good dad. He was like, oh, okay, son, well, I love you, and God loves you, and you're going to be okay. So I went on strike against God and church. Well, it lasted all but 2 weeks. I think it only lasted 2 weeks, and my little tantrum was over. But I wanted to share that stuff with you in the early onset of this message. Now what I want to do is just take what we went through and begin to unpack some principles in this momentum series. So I'm going to do that now, and I'm going to jump into just teaching just a little bit. But happy anniversary, by the way. Let's go out of town this weekend. So I felt like in that season of my life, I felt like we were trapped in a universe where Murphy's Law was every bit as dominant as the law of gravity itself. That's what it felt like in our life at the time. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and at the worst possible time, had become not just the cute mantra of a pessimist, but for me, it felt like it had become a vortex from which there was no escape. And so when Stacey met me, I was bankrupt financially, literally, financially and emotionally. But back in my past, a rich spiritual deposit had been made in my life. It had always been an anchor for me in every storm I'd ever gone through. So Heavenly Father began to make that deposit in me initially, and He had breathed on it multiple times over the years. But at the age of 12, I started having dreams and visions and encounters. At the age of 12, I began getting prophetic words from ministers. By the age of 14, I'd had a vision where Jesus came and met me and called me to be a pastor and to be a teacher. And so these deposits had been made in me. My parents recognized it. They began to help cultivate it and develop the destiny that they knew was present. And then in addition to that, like I said, ministers were coming through prophesying to me, just like I felt like a lightning rod, just attracting lightning. But after my divorce, I sensed that the Lord was beginning to pull me back into focusing on relationship with Him while I had the extra time and to dig deep into His Word. But I had convinced myself that I needed to be in a relationship because I had sat around, I had done all of the adding up in my head. I felt like I was a good man, a good husband, a good provider, and a good daddy, and it wasn't fair that I should be alone. It wasn't fair that I should be starting my life over again at almost 30, just the bottom side of 30. So I never was the type to hang out in clubs where I never cared for the single life. I wasn't looking for a date. I wasn't looking for a girlfriend. Wasn't looking for a good time. I was looking for my next wife. That's where my heart was at that time. So when Stacey came into my life, she probably knew that neither one of us were ready for a relationship, a marriage commitment like that. We were both unhealthy emotionally. We both had some immaturity in our lives. But I think she said it a while ago, she also recognized that I was a good man, a good husband, a good provider, and a good daddy. She saw the potential there in me. So we both ignored caution and wisdom and patience, and we just plunged head first out of the frying pan into the fire. And so when the Lord finally began to manifest His presence to me in the weeks after we lost Benjamin, He began initially by just coming to me and loving on me, not giving me a bunch of answers that I wanted, but giving me the love that I needed. And He began to remind me of some bigger things, some bigger picture things. He began to remind me of my purpose, my destiny, my calling. Eventually, He began to deal with me about prioritizing the relationships in my life in the correct order by making Him my source of affirmation. Now, that's key. Stacey and I haven't even discussed this in great detail, but she knows I discovered later in life that words of affirmation were my love language. They were, it was my primary love language. It's what kept my love tank full. If you've never read that book, the love languages, you need to check that out. It will help you learn how to communicate effectively, make sure you're giving everything you need to and being everything you need to be for your mate. Well, I found out years later, but she found out words of affirmation were my love language. So affirmation was key to me. But I had to be careful where I drew that affirmation from. So what the Lord began to do was try to get me to focus on my relationship with Him so that I wouldn't go off everywhere that I felt a word of affirmation coming to me from. I ignored that. Stacey and I jumped right into a relationship when we probably weren't ready, but by the grace of God, we got through it. We survived it. We survived that first couple of years, and we ended up sticking through it and are celebrating 22 years now. I misspoke and said 23 last week, but in my defense, I asked my wife before church, has it been 23 years or been 22? And she said 23. So then she texted me Monday morning and said, I just did the math and it's only 22. And I was like, oh, you're supposed to be my spell check. You're supposed to be the one that I go to. But the quicksand that I felt like as though I'd been trapped in for a couple of years was going to pull me down. It became a mental obstacle that I had to learn to overcome. And I began to overcome it by renewing my mind to who I was in Christ and who he was in me. Understanding my identity became my objective in my journey over the next few years as I continued to discover who I was, who my father was. I began to feel more and more free from the emotional roller coaster ride that I had been on. This is key, and I want you to get this. I had to shift my focus off of what I deserved or didn't deserve and get it on who I was. The quicksand that you think you're stuck in many times in life, it's not what you think it is. Oftentimes, the quicksand is the mindset of you wanting to have the discussion of whether you deserve something or don't deserve something. That becomes a quicksand, a miry pit, if you will, that you can get stuck in, and that's where I was at. I had been asking God all the wrong questions. I had been tallying my works and tallying my faithfulness and my commitment, and I've been there. I've done everything you've asked me to do. I've done this and that. So I was I was laying my resume out to him, asking him to justify his lack of involvement in the miscarriage of my baby by tallying up all of my good works. Well, I'm telling you, I mean, I've grown. Thank God I've grown a lot since then, but that was a period of my life I had to get through that. When I began to ask the right questions, he began to communicate with me openly and freely. You have to get past what you deserve or what you don't deserve and focus on who you are. Identity is the key. When you really know who you are, you can still reign in life, even when you're in the midst of whatever valley you might be passing through or a quicksand pit that you're stuck in. Along with the discovery of your identity also comes the revealing of your assignment. So as I began to focus on my identity, I began to finally gain some traction again in the assignment that God had placed on my life. As image bearers in the earth, all of us have this assignment in common. Our assignment is to bring heaven into every station of life that we have access to. Everywhere that we serve, everywhere that we work, everywhere that we live, we should be bringing heaven into the earth. So we all have movies that are like favorite movies we like to watch. My favorite repeat movie that I watch over and over, I don't care how many times I don't even know how many times I've seen it anymore. Stacey can be gone somewhere and she'll be come in one night and I'm sitting there watching it again and she just shakes her head when she walks through the room. It's Groundhog Day with Bill Murray. I love Groundhog Day. I love Bill Murray. I've always had a crush on Andy McDowell, so how can you go wrong with all, If you've never seen Groundhog Day, Bill Murray he's a meteorologist named Phil Connor who is trapped in a cycle of repeating and reliving the same day over and over. And initially, he begins to use it. He begins to throw caution to the wind, and he begins to do everything he ever wanted to do, but he didn't do because of the fear of consequences, because he begins to realize it doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., and I'm going to be able to just keep on going because there's going to be no consequences. So he's like eating tablesfuls of donuts and jelly rolls. He's smoking, he's drinking, he's robbing an armored truck, he's doing all kinds of stuff, serving his own self, his own wants, his own desires, okay? But finally, and what happens is he ends up feeling hopelessly trapped, and he tries to end it all multiple times. I mean, it's a funny movie. Drives off of a cliff once with a gopher or the groundhog is driving. He says, don't drive angry, don't drive angry. It's just a real cute, funny movie. But of course, I can't watch stuff without pulling life lessons out of it. Finally, he begins to utilize the time to, a shift happens in him. And he begins to utilize the time to foster relationships with people in the town that he's stuck in, better himself, and become an all-around diverse guy who changes flat tires for old ladies. He buys a newlywed couple their ultimate dream gift. saves a man's life by doing the Heimlich maneuver on him, catches a little boy who falls from a tree, the same tree every day, but never says thanks. He learns how to he becomes a chiropractor in the movie. He learns to play piano, learns to do ice sculptures, and then ends up sweeping the woman of his dreams off of her feet. Well, Stacey's favorite movie to watch over and over on repeat, and I like it too, though, it's called The Replacements. Not as many people have heard of The Replacements maybe as Groundhog Day, but it's a good movie. Keanu Reeves is in it. Gene Hackman is in it. And it's a movie about the Washington Sentinels, who are a professional football team. But the league has gone on strike. All of the athletes have left and walked out and gone on strike. Well, the owners want to salvage the season, so they go out and they find a bunch of misfits and rejects and former football players that didn't cut it. They bring all of them back and they cross the line and put a team together. So the movie's about the hilarity that ensues, when you get that mix there. Well, Gene Hackman is the coach. There's a scene where they're all in the locker room and he's trying to get them to bond together and come together as a team, and he's trying to get them to face their fears. So he asks the question, what are you afraid of? And one guy raises his hand and says, spiders. I'm afraid of spiders, coach. And then everybody starts saying, yeah, man, I hate spiders. Bugs, and another guy's afraid of bees, And so especially on the field, these are like 300-pound linemen, and they're afraid of spiders and bees. And he says, man, that's not what I mean, guys. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about on the field. What are you afraid of? Well, Shane Falco, the quarterback, he says, quicksand. And then the guys say, oh, quicksand, that's the worst, man. Quicksand. And he said, quicksand on the field? What are you talking about, Shane? And he says, I don't think that's what Shane's talking about. And Shane says, no. He said, what I'm talking about is when you're in a game, in the heat of a moment, and you make one poor decision, and then things begin to go bad. Another thing happens, then another thing happens, then another thing happens, and you can't stop it. You lose all the momentum, and in fact, now you have reverse momentum, and it feels like quicksand that you're stuck in. And that's what I want to talk about for a few minutes, because I found that to be the case, not just in sporting events, but in life. What do you do when a series of bad events and tragedies and failures, and if we're to be honest, bad choices, leave you feeling as though you're stuck and sinking in quicksand? Funny you should ask. First of all, let me say this, though. All the movies we used to watch growing up that had people getting stuck in quicksand and dying all the time had me convinced that quicksand was going to be a bigger problem than it ended up being when I grew up. But it's the quicksand of life that we tend to get stuck in that causes the most difficulty, because it threatens to steal all forward progress and momentum. So I actually watched several videos yesterday in my office with steps of what to do if you ever need to escape quicksand. Yeah, sure enough, man, it's out there. You can Google it and it pulls up videos and articles to read. Well, fairly quickly into it, I realized that these steps that it gave us for how to escape quicksand are also applicable in the quicksand pits of life. So I want to give these to you, these 6 steps real quick. Number 1, make yourself as light as possible by tossing all unnecessary items away. Now, I didn't put these in the slides, did I? Okay. I'll repeat it for you. Make yourself as light as possible by tossing all unnecessary weight off of you. In life, it's necessary to get help unpacking the layers of emotional garb that tend to weigh us down. So just like if you're ever caught in quicksand, it tells you to shed all of the unnecessary clothing, shoes, bags, anything that becomes restricting or extra weight on you. Shed all of it and toss it away from you so that you can become as light as possible in that quicksand. In life, it's the same way. What happens if we need to regain forward momentum is we have to be able to cast off the things that emotionally are wrapping us, constricting, restricting, and weighing us down. Number 2, try to take a few steps backwards. Try to take a few steps backwards. You might be thinking, Pastor Mark, what does that got to do with life? I know backwards doesn't sound like progress, but it's often necessary to regroup, to look back and assess and evaluate the choices you made and the steps that you took in order to understand where things began to unravel at. So there's nothing wrong with stopping, looking behind you, reassessing, reevaluating. Number three, keep your arms up so they don't get stuck in quicksand as well. Keep your arms up so they don't get stuck in the quicksand as well. Your arms up signify a few things to me. First of all, the Bible says help comes from above. Second of all, arms up to me says praise in the midst of my pain and my problem. Continue to keep my praise going up. And which brings me to point number 4. Number 4 says reach out for someone or something to grab hold of. Reach out for someone or something to grab hold of. So I keep my arms up and praise in spite of the problem, in spite of the pain. That also keeps my hands and my arms in a position to reach out for someone or something to grab hold of. In other words, don't allow my pride to rob me of the life-saving technique. I want you to get this. This is a life-saving technique of reaching out to others for help. Grabbing anything I can to keep from going down. That is a life-saving technique that many people have too much pride to participate in. Reach out to others for help. You've got to do that in life. Number 5, take deep breaths. Take deep breaths. Now, for the most part, breathing is automatic and it's involuntary, but deep breathing is different. Deep breathing relieves stress and anxiety due to its physiological effect on the nervous system. Breathing slowly and mindfully activates the hypothalamus that's connected to the pituitary gland in the brain, and it sends out neurohormones that inhibit stress-producing hormones and trigger a relaxation response. That's copied and pasted off of a scientific definition website. So what it's simply saying is deep breathing, there is a reason why it causes a reduction in stress levels and a reduction in anxiety, and it brings a sense of calm. Spiritually speaking, let's connect that right there, that deep breathing in and out. Spiritually speaking, let's connect that to meditating on the truth of God's Word. Meditation is the process of information becoming a revelation that can produce a transformation by setting your mind on who God is for you in that particular circumstance. So meditating, take deep breaths, meditate. Meditate on the Word of God. I'm going to meditate on the Word. I'm going to meditate on some information so that it can become a revelation and produce a transformation, because I'm going to meditate on who God is for me in this particular circumstance. And I don't care what the mess or the pit is that you're stuck in, He's with you. He's always with you. Then number 6, move slowly and deliberately. Move slowly and deliberately. It's necessary to learn patience and trust, as well as learning not to be quick and rash, particularly when you get yourself in a panic, because this helps preserve spending unnecessary energy. So it's better to make each move intentional, so you've got to slow things down. You got to be patient and you got to be intentional. So we usually get into the messes in life that we're in by making choices and decisions that got us there. Not every time. I told you a while ago several instances of things in mine and Stacey's lives that just broke down, just quit working. I mean, life happens. Not everything is as cut and dry as saying this is God's fault or this is the devil's fault, okay? So life isn't that simple. Life is complex. We are moving forward in life. We are in relationships. We have vehicles that have moving parts and components. Your house has all of the moving parts and components. Things are going to break down. Things are going to wear out, okay? And so, but we usually get into the mess and become stuck when we begin to make wrong choices and wrong decisions. I don't care how deep the valley is or how big the pile is, the escape, the way out is found one decision at a time and one choice at a time. I was having a conversation with a young lady who felt overwhelmed. She felt overwhelmed by the mess that her life was in. And she said, I'm so overwhelmed, I just don't know what to do. And I said, well, for starters, I said, you can't look at the gap between where you presently are and where you feel you need to be. You can't look at that gap and try to make the leap in one move, because that can be overwhelming. I said, especially if the gap is wide. I said, you got into the problem one decision and one choice at a time. You'll get out of it the same way. If you want to reverse momentum and create positive momentum instead of negative momentum, you have to start making right choices, right decisions, include wisdom and strategy from God, because it doesn't matter how much talent or potential you have, ultimately, you're successful because of your choices, not because of your potential and not because of your talent. I mentioned the movie Groundhog Day and how he eventually began to focus on becoming a better person for everyone around him by developing skill sets and learning crafts and trades and volunteering his time to help others. Now, what I didn't mention, but you might know if you've seen the movie, is that ended up being the very thing that broke him out of the cycle of repeating the same nightmare over and over again. Finally, one morning when he woke up, a new day had dawned. And it was over. The cycle was over. In every season and circumstance, I'm convinced that the one thing we cannot lose sight of is our need to continue growing and learning and developing as people, developing by reading, by praying, by studying, by pressing through. It's not, you can't just sit by idly waiting on a significant moment to come and impact your destiny and change everything in your life. You have to, while you're waiting, be very intentional, take deep breaths, be intentional about learning, about growing, about developing. Growth and development are what actually creates the opportunities for significant moments to manifest in our life. So instead of sitting and waiting, challenge yourself to grow and develop by reading, by learning, by studying, and by expanding your thoughts. Bishop Tony Miller always says, God is preparing me for what he has prepared for me. He is always preparing me for what he has prepared for me. And if you'll commit yourself to reading and learning and studying and expanding your thoughts in the midst of whatever adversity and tragedy you're dealing with, you'll actually accelerate the timing of things, and you'll begin to invite a Kairos moment into your life. So you don't just wait idly on your destiny. You attract it. You attract it through personal development. Then you recognize it, you seize it, and you step into it. So sports teams understand the power of momentum. Sports teams understand that even though it's invisible, it's very real, it's very powerful. The Atlanta Falcons discovered that in Super Bowl 51 about 2 or 3 years back. They were playing the New England Patriots, and they got a lead. They built up a lead of 28 points in the first half, okay? By all rights, the game should have been over, except that the New England coaching staff and the players, they understood that if they could execute just a few good plays, turn them into a few good series, score some points, they would turn momentum around. Well, that's exactly what happened. They came out after halftime. They focused on executing plays, executing series, getting a few scores, and they turned it around. And Super Bowl 51 became an instant classic because it was one of the largest comeback wins in history. They came back from 28 points behind and ended up winning that Super Bowl. A few good intentional choices or decisions could turn things around in your life as well, or a divine piece of strategy, strategic wisdom from God. And that wisdom might come to you from His Word, His Spirit, might come from a minister, it might come from a book that you read, might come from a life coach, but He knows how to get it through to you if you can silence the distractions and catch the right call. And that's the problem. When you're watching football, you'll realize that the quarterbacks now have a speaker in their helmet, an earpiece in their helmet that allows them to talk to the coach on the sideline for a few minutes, or for a few seconds rather. So he sends the play in on the field. But if you've ever watched a football game and you've seen the quarterback doing this, then it means that he is having trouble hearing the signal being sent in because the crowd noise around him is too big of a distraction. What happens is the Lord sometimes is sending you the right call that can become it could be very plain, it could be very simple, but it could be very intentional, and it could be exactly what you need to begin turning things around in your life at the right moment, but you have to silence the distraction so that you can get the call. So Murphy's Law, I told you we were going to title this Breaking Murphy's Laws. Murphy's Law has to yield to the higher law. The higher law of God says he works all things together for me according to his purpose. That's a higher law. Murphy's Law has to yield to that. There's another place that says these light afflictions, which are but for a moment, are working for me a far more eternal weight of glory. Those two principles break Murphy's laws. Everything that is coming against me, he takes it and makes it work for me to produce greater glory in my life. This is just the first installment in the Momentum series. We want to continue to unpack it this month. And I pray that you guys have a blessed weekend and a blessed week. Love you guys very much, and God bless you.